All right, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I obviously wish that we could all be together, but hopefully virtually we'll be able to create a lively discussion around prioritizing ideas so that you can bring them to life. As a quick introduction, my name is Lauren Katzberg, and I'm the staff product manager at Reverb. Reverb is a website and an app where anyone can buy and sell musical instruments. Reverb launched in 2013, and we were acquired by Etsy last year, which is super exciting. Before I joined Reverb, I ran a company called Stylisted, which allowed women to book on-location hair and makeup from a network of vetted beauty professionals. I would like to start today with a quote. Ideas without execution are hallucinations. This is a quote that I thought about a lot when I had the idea for Stylisted, and I think about it a lot today in my current role at Reverb. This quote has been credited with everyone from Steve Cates of AOL to Thomas Edison. Some say it's an old Japanese proverb. Regardless of where it came from, I really like it. It really resonates with me. To me, it says that ideas are cheap. When I had the idea for Stylisted, it was one of dozens of ideas that I had had in my lifetime that I never did anything with. And I've maintained a pretty similar batting average while at Reverb. So a quick reminder on Reverb. Reverb is the largest marketplace for selling musical instruments. We get constant feedback from both our buyers and our sellers that rely on our product daily. They rely on it to keep the doors open of their small businesses. They rely on it to find that perfect instrument to inspire their next song. And one of Reverb's greatest assets is that our team, our internal team, is comprised of music lovers and musicians that also use the website. So you can imagine that there are plenty of great ideas floating around across our passionate users and our very passionate internal team. Which brings us back to this great quote. I was brought onto Reverb at the beginning of the year to start a new team called Pricing and Offers. For some context, Reverb has a number of different product teams that are all charged with focusing on a specific area to optimize. So we have, for example, a team that's focused on the buyer experience and a team that's focused on the seller experience. My new team had the charge of focusing exclusively on pricing and offers, everything related to pricing. So that involves helping sellers understand what their gear is worth, helping buyers find really good deals on the site, and helping both sides negotiate so that they can come to a mutual understanding of what a fair price looks like. Pricing is a really critical component of most marketplace businesses because it's usually the most important factor in aligning supply and demand and driving marketplace liquidity. So when it comes to musical instruments specifically, negotiating is a really big part of the gear buying culture. It's really not uncommon for someone to walk into a music gear store and try to haggle over the price of a piano or a guitar. So the ability to make and accept offers on Reverb is hugely important. When I was brought on to Reverb to start the new pricing and offers team, there was a seemingly endless history of pricing ideas for me to tap into. So I had to comb through old presentation decks, online forums. I spoke to my really passionate colleagues and some of our super users. And at the end of all of this, I was essentially gifted 50 plus ideas that someone at some point in Reverb's history had been super passionate about. And it really never stopped. Every time I heard Slack ping, it was somebody else coming to me with a new pricing idea. And of course, I was also a new set of eyes. So I came into it with my own ideas to throw into the mix. So being a brand new team, I was essentially handed a blank canvas. I had tremendous support from senior leadership and also from the other product teams that had been there for a lot longer. But I was really challenged and empowered to bring my own outside experience and fresh perspective to create a blueprint for this new team. So just to recap, I had a wealth of ideas, but a team without any real mandate or scope or any vision of what success looked like. This was super daunting at first, but with a process, we were able to work really quickly to establish priorities and to launch product changes that we could measure. So today, I would like to share with you exactly how I did this. I know that every company is different, and it's going to be a different experience from person to person, company to company, team to team. But a lot of what I experienced during my time at Reverb is transferable, I think, to any team that's trying to bring new ideas to life. So I'm going to walk you through this 8-step process. I'm going to do it fairly quickly because I do want to leave time at the end for questions and discussion. So the first step is to get organized. When I joined Reverb, pricing ideas lived everywhere. They were in different Slack channels, they were in research, in random team decks that I'd come across, and of course they were also in my brain. So the first thing I did was create a central repository for all pricing ideas. This was going to be a living, breathing document that would become the exhaustive list of all pricing related insights. One thing I really learned is that you can't assume that an idea and the details behind that idea that you're discussing in a meeting, no matter how excited you might be about it in the moment, will stick in your brain. You don't want to rely on your memory, and you don't want to waste your time relearning old ideas when they pop up again months later. As you start to collect ideas in one place and see them all together, themes should start to emerge. When you bucket your ideas into themes or levers, this will help you establish a framework. So I put together like a somewhat simple and silly example of what this could look like. So let's say that you've been wanting to reduce stress in your life, which I know a lot of us are. So you've been brainstorming ideas, and maybe you've been researching online and talking to friends. Instead of just creating a laundry list of random ideas, you should write the ideas down as you have them and see what themes start to emerge. Organizing your ideas in this way will allow you to appreciate the levers that you have at your disposal to reduce stress. So in this case, it would be spending less time working, avoiding stress triggers, engaging in activities that alleviate stress, and changing how you internalize stress. The next step is to know your mandate. One of the biggest challenges that we faced as a new team at Reverb was carving out exactly what our team would be accountable for. Pricing touches on almost every facet of the Reverb platform, and there were already a number of well-oiled product teams that were working on implementing changes, many that touched on pricing. So as our levers emerged and our ideas became easier to organize under them, our team's mandate really emerged. So just continuing on from the previous example, you can see how we can boil up our multiple levers into a single mandate. In this case, taken together, the 4 levers speak to an ultimate mandate of using our time, use your time while at work and away from work more intentionally to minimize stress. One of the best things about actually having a mandate is that it's one of your first lines of defense in filtering out ideas. Once our team had a mandate, we had something that we could point to when stakeholders had an idea that I instinctively felt didn't belong with our team. And that's actually a really good transition to our next step, which is to make your framework visible. You should share your framework with your stakeholders so that they can appreciate the scope of your team. And you also want them to see that their ideas that they've taken the time to share with you have been captured, and so they can feel like they've been heard. You can also leverage your documentation to very easily bring others up to speed in your product area, and also let them know why certain ideas that they have might not fit with your team. Next step, step 4, is to understand your goals. A mandate is a really good place to start in understanding where you want to go, but it isn't a goal. You need to determine how your success will be measured. Do you have revenue targets? Are there specific questions that you want answered about your users or metrics your team is responsible for? In some cases, leadership might hand you a list of goals for you to have, or maybe you'll be creating these goals from scratch. I found that in most organizations, it's really a hybrid of the two. You're almost spending your time trying to reconcile wider company goals with the goals that you have in mind for your team to achieve. Either way, you'll need to be super clear on what those goals are so that you can measure how successful you've been. Okay, so now you have well-organized ideas and they all tie into a mandate and goals for your team, but now it's actually time to choose the ideas that you'll want to execute on. And you'll want to start doing this by building a case for the ideas that you and your team feel passionately about. So for each of the ideas in my framework, I like to, skipped ahead and then went back. I like to make sure that every idea I have ties directly to a real salient user problem that I'd like to solve. So hopefully you have strong data and insights that prove that the problem is real and that the idea that you have is a solution to that problem. If not, you want to make sure that you can get your hands on those insights and data. If you can't, which I know is often the case, that might be a really strong indicator that this unfounded idea isn't really worth the time pursuing. And while it's easier to default to your intuition, which I know a lot of us have sometimes rely on, and you want to avoid the work of finding the data and the insights, I really think that leaning into data and insights will ensure that you're focusing on the ideas that can actually move the metrics that you care most about. Okay, so once you have the ideas with the strongest case, you'll have to create your order for your plan of attack. Time and resources are always limited, at least in my experience, so establishing priorities is pretty critical. There are a number of methods that I know that different organizations and teams use to establish priorities. There are two that I'd like to share today that I found super helpful. One's a little lighter touch and one's a bit more involved. So the first is the RICE framework. It provides a really quick way to score your ideas as a means to compare them. A high score indicating that this is an idea that's probably worth pursuing. I find it especially helpful in identifying quick wins, which are like the projects that you'll want to implement fairly quickly to build momentum and start learning about maybe, in most cases, your users. I also like it because it's super collaborative. So for the effort, it's pretty, standard to reach out to your designers and your developers and get a sense of the time required for a project. But you can do this in different ways as well. So like I've put in the past, I've asked my team to vote anonymously on how impactful they think an idea will be and what their confidence is that that idea will be successful. And that's worked really well. The next framework is the Roti Framework, which stands for Return on Time Invested. It requires a bit more work, but it really is an amazing tool, especially if your team's goals are tied to revenue. It looks really simple on its surface. It's deceptively simple seeming, but a lot of teams struggle with calculating that first input, potential win size. My team uses a fairly sophisticated formula that feeds this two-sided statistical test, and it's all supported by Reverb's wonderful data team. We use inputs like minimum detectable effect and conversion rates and required sample size to come up with an estimated revenue idea for the experiments that we want to run. And I know that, not everybody is so comfortable with statistics and most don't have a data team behind them, but you can really keep your assumptions here super basic to leverage this Roti framework. So let's say, for example, that you have 50 customers and they're each paying you $100 a month for your service. Let's say you have a product idea that you think will double your customer base, adding 50 more customers to your platform. Then your potential win size would be 50 times 100 or $5,000 from that product change. Step 7 here is a reminder just to maintain transparency throughout your process. Even if your prioritization math isn't perfect, which it won't be, I can almost promise you that, you should make sure that you're sharing your assumptions and your logic with your team and your stakeholders. This level of transparency will help you maintain buy-in across your organization and be a very helpful tool in pushing back as others try to inject their own priorities onto your roadmap. So you should use your prioritization scheme to maintain your focus. And you want to use it to your advantage when a new idea presents itself that's worth reprioritizing for, which I think we all know happens sometimes. Focus is really important, but you also need to be nimble to be able to jump on new ideas that could potentially be even more impactful than the ones that you and your team have planned for. But before you do that and get ahead of yourself, you kind of have to take it from the top. And when a new idea does present itself, make sure it falls under your mandate, that it's backed by strong insights and can positively impact the metrics that you care about before you go ahead and implement. So I think, yeah, that's step 8. That's the end of it. At this point, I'd love to open it up to questions, and I'll also stop sharing my screen so that I can see your faces and the chat. All right. I'm going to catch up on the chat here and see if there are any questions. Do you have any regular cadence for doing this prioritization? This question comes from Gabby. That is a really good question, Gabby. So one of the challenges is that, I personally get really excited about ideas, or someone in leadership might come to me and, present an idea as pressing that the team kind of has to derail and focus on immediately. But what I like to do in that case is take a step back and build a case for that idea. So I'll, almost serve as that idea's advocate and frame the idea around a problem I'm trying to solve. I'll gather literally on one slide so I can visualize it, all of the insights and data I have behind that idea. I'll list the metrics that implementing this idea will move for my team and for the company. And then I don't share it with my team until our Tuesday weekly meeting. I don't know when your team meets or what the frequency is, but our team also meets every day. And technically I could, use our daily stands to bring up new ideas, but I really don't want to derail the team and take their time away from the things that we've all already agreed are priorities to introduce these new ideas that are still somewhat, half-baked and unfounded. So about weekly, as we're going through, our entire planning session and going through the status of all of our in-flight projects, I will spend the end of that meeting introducing any new ideas and presenting the case that have popped up since last week's meeting. You mentioned that many teams within Reverb touch a piece of pricing and offers. When you're building a case for ideas you feel strongly about, what other relevant stakeholders do you recommend bringing into meetings about implementing the idea? That is a really good question. It definitely varies by idea. One of our most important stakeholders, of course, is our users. So oftentimes I'll actually rely on our research team to talk to our users on our behalf, or sometimes they'll create like a conduit where we can talk to our users, listening in as research asks them questions. I have a direct relationship with some of our biggest buyers and sellers, so I'll reach out to them and ask them, how they feel about an idea and see if it's actually, addressing a pain point that they have. Another really important stakeholder for us at Reverb is our customer team, our engagement team, and our outreach team that is interfacing with our buyers and sellers more than any other arm at Reverb. We have a whole incredible team that's fielding questions from our users daily. So they really know kind of what the hot buttons are, and they have a really good finger on the pulse when it comes to an idea of how users will respond to something. And then they also have important data for us. So we can, leverage them to see things like how many users actually complained about a certain problem, or how many, bringing it to pricing and offers, how many refunds were created because of Y problem on the platform. So those are really important stakeholders for us. Thanks for that feedback, Gabby. From Sarah, is there a maximum team size you think this approach would work for, or is it really applicable for teams of all sizes? I think it's applicable for teams of all sizes. One beautiful thing about having a documented process and making sure that the collateral for your team, your ideas, and your prioritization are visible is that it's a really good tool for onboarding new team members. So what I love about this approach is that it makes it easy to scale a team. You can have a really small team to start on with, and then as your team grows, you can easily share your process and point them in the direction of all of your pricing ideas so that they're brought up to speed on the history without having to recreate the wheel every time, where they're having the same meetings with stakeholders to understand their priorities, or also combing through Slack to understand where past ideas have come from. So I think it's useful for teams of all sizes, and especially useful in scaling a team. Shayna, great question. This definitely comes up a lot. What can I do if senior leadership insists on a project that does not fit priorities? This is a big one. This comes up a lot. And I think that this is where the framework and your calculations of priority really shines. First of all, if you have done a decent job of sharing your mandate and your framework with leadership throughout your team's existence, not just when a new idea pops up, then they should already know when they're coming to you if this is something that really fits within the scope and the mandate of your team. So that's kind of like your first line of defense. But the best thing about this is that if they have an idea, build a case for it, treat it like you would other ideas that you know have like the potential to be important and impactful. But if the case doesn't bear out and it's not generating nearly enough revenue as, let's say, like the other ideas that you have in your pipeline for that quarter, show leadership that math. Again, the math won't be perfect, but data is like the great equalizer. If you can say to them, thanks for your idea, I've thought about this, I've really tried to like see how this could fit within our wider company goals. I've calculated that it would potentially maybe be like a neutral win or a win of like a couple $100,000. Just so you know, we have 4 other projects scheduled this quarter that are all scheduled to be $2 million+ wins. You're almost helping them make the decision themselves that this is something that shouldn't be a priority, assuming that you're aligned on what those goals are. Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions? I have a couple of my own questions for the group. Okay, let's see. I haven't done this before, so bear with me. I'm going to add you.
Hi, Lauren. A very useful talk.
Thank you. Can you pronounce it for me?
Prachi.
Prachi, great.
Yes. A very useful talk because this is something that we all deal with in all professions. Currently, I'm a software engineer with Innova. But previously, I was working for this startup kind of situation. And I have a question for you. How do you deal with people and people having habits? Because if you have an idea which will improve the workflow, but it has to change how the current workflow is, people hate it.
Yes.
Hate doing something new, and mostly because they're habituated to the old process, even if it's not so efficient. And that's what I think mostly software engineers end up dealing with, because we make a software which is going to change the process and people hate change of process. So how would you say we deal with selling that portion of things?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially you're talking about an idea in a different way that we've been talking about ideas so far, but I love it. It's not necessarily a process change idea is not necessarily an idea, a product change idea, which are the ideas that we've mostly been chatting about. But I think the process and the logic still applies where, the most important thing is to build a case for the idea that you want to implement. I think that even though ideas, new things are hard and people don't like to, really mix it up in the way that they work, it's really hard to implement long-standing change. I think you need to build a case. And if you can, have strong data and insights around why you think this process improvement will eventually improve the lives of your colleagues and your team, then I think that that's really the best way to start to bring people on board. So if you can quantify the change that you expect by saying, doing this way will mean that we'll have 2 less meetings a week, saving, 3 hours for the team, and ultimately saving 6 hours for the team because you'll be spending less time also doing X, Y, and Z. I think that that's a fantastic way to start that conversation. Yeah, that would be my advice there.
That is so true. I just feel like sometimes to start those conversations. Sometimes I personally feel like it helps if it's a group of people, speak to 1 or 2 of them individually to sell the idea, because you need supporters in the room.
I think that's a great, I think that's a fantastic place to start. If you do have like the floor of like a weekly meeting to share new business. That's wonderful, but you identified a really important maybe first step. You're socializing the idea with individuals on your team and kind of like getting their favor so that you have supporters on that call. And it's so interesting. Like sometimes you share an idea in a group setting and everyone's, you have their full attention and they're understanding what you're saying. And then you realize a week later when you have the discussion again that no one really fully understood or was listening and really appreciated the crux of your argument. So I think having those one-on-ones and socializing the idea earlier is a great way to implement change.
Yeah, definitely. I really liked how you addressed that we need to follow up on what we have pitched, because usually, like in chat also, I saw people saying that even if you have an idea, you may just walk away from it and not follow up enough. So I think that is my biggest takeaway from your presentation. Especially, I like the portion about stress and how to manage it. I took a screenshot because I think I do need to implement that.
Awesome. Thanks, Prachi. Any other questions? Anybody else want to join the panel? And in the meantime, I'll kind of pull up my questions here that I have written down. Okay. I guess I'll just start with my questions. Curious if anybody has faced challenges in bringing, in addition to Prachi, bringing ideas to life in their organization, and if this resonates. I'll move through these. Does anybody have any prioritization tools other than that Roti and the rice framework that I presented? I'd be curious to hear about it. Okay, I'm gonna move on. To-do list, yeah. I think I've had instances, this is from Sarah, in every company I've worked for, whether it's due to a that's not your role scenario or just pure bandwidth challenges. More of an organization tool. Sure, yeah, absolutely, Tess. Okay, cool. Can anybody share a time that you justified pivoting to a project that better fit within your mandate, or maybe even a time where your mandate changed and you kind of had to roll with it? Prachi all the time, yep.
Sorry, I probably scared you because I did not ask you for my permission to jump on, but I can kind of, so we do a quarterly planning kind of initiative for tech at Innova, and we found that we're pivoting constantly on these quarterly plans, and like the scope is always changing. I don't know if other people's companies try to do more kind of section planning so it's easier to pivot, but we found by like trying to narrow it down to like vague goals helps so you're not pivoting so much, if that kind of makes sense.
Pivoting like your priorities, or pivoting your mandate, or both?
A little bit of both. It's kind of all over the board depending on the project, how the requirements change, and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge that I think a lot of organizations face. But I think as long as you're clear, especially if you've been good at identifying the goals for the quarter, if you're able, or whatever the time period might be, if you're able again to like present a case as to why these new priorities or new mandate will help you achieve those goals, I think you can be successful even if things are kind of changing frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess to like touch on the question I asked before, a lot of times things change from a senior leadership level, and they'll be like, our priorities have shifted on this, but it may not necessarily fit the original priorities that you as a team still feel you have. So we do often a lot of back and forth on that. So I don't know if there's tools that help with that back and forth specifically when it comes to kind of planning and kind of mid-planning shifts of priority, but we always find that really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I think like for me, what I try to do is really take ownership of my specific area. Like I want to be the pricing and offers guru of Reverb, and I want to own every single idea and every single thought that's ever been thought about in the realm of pricing and offers, so that if somebody from senior leadership comes to me, and remember that they have such like a wider purview, they're not just thinking about pricing and offers, they're thinking about everything. And if they come to me and they say, this idea is pricing related, so I want you to implement it, I'm the expert on pricing and offers, right? They're the expert on your area, and you can be the one to show them, build the case to show either this is a great idea and this fits within the realm of things that we can do that'll help us achieve our goals, or it's really not. Establishing yourself as that expert, I think, really helps push back.
Really own your expertise and don't take no for an answer. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Sarah, this is a good point. She said, I appreciate how dynamic a company like Innova is. I'd rather be at a company that can pivot and move quickly than a larger company that has more difficulty adjusting, for sure. And I think finding the balance in a company is really difficult. You want a company that is well-resourced enough, and that sometimes comes from a large company, but you also want one that's nimble and agile. And that's one of the things that I love about Reverb. It's kind of in that perfect sweet spot. So that's been pretty fantastic. Ooh, Sarah. All right.
Hi.
Hey.
Nice to be able to speak with you. Really great talk. I had a question around women in technology, right? I think oftentimes it can be difficult for women to voice their opinion, especially if they're on a team like Reagan referenced in her keynote that's very male dominated. Do you have any advice for women to encourage other women on bringing up their voice and being able to make some of the suggestions that you've made?
Oh man. I think like just, kind of goes back to the idea of owning it. If you should feel confident in your job that you know your stuff better than anybody else. That's your role in the organization. And confidence is incredibly important in feeling like you are able to speak up. So I just think owning your job and sharing your opinions as often as possible is critical. I know that that's easier said than done sometimes, but
yeah, I think that's one of the nice things about a conference like this, or being involved in networking and kind of building up your group of like your team outside of your company, even because they can sometimes give you that confidence that you might not have otherwise.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What and this is a little off the topic of your talk, but still very much in line with this idea. Like, what's some of your best advice for women looking to network with other women?
Oh my gosh. So my biggest advice is that you should always ask for somebody's time, even if it's scary to do it. I think that like women, everyone, I think it's a challenge, but I can only speak to my experience as a woman. It's really hard to like ask people for favors, and asking someone for their time to talk about their career or your career is a favor. And that's tough to do. But at the end of the day, like people like talking about themselves. And if they're in a job that you think is cool, they probably think it's cool too. And they want to talk about it. Like who doesn't like talking about something they're passionate about? So I think like, go for it. Go on LinkedIn, go on, any forum where you are encountering people whose careers you admire or people you admire, and seek them out. And I can't tell you how many times I have had like incredible conversations with women or people, just from like a very warm, cold email that I've sent, where I've let people know like why I want their time. Not just like, hey, I'd love to go for coffee. Like, are you interested? That probably won't yield an incredible outcome for you. But if you can tell them why, what about their background, what do you hope to learn from them, what do you admire about them, I can't imagine anybody turning down that invitation. Like, sure, you think I'm wonderful and you want me to talk about how wonderful I am? Like, let's do it, you know? So I just think put yourself out there is my advice. And I think you'll be surprised with the result.
Yeah, I think that this remote world that so many of us are in right now is almost an advantage in some ways, because it's easier than ever for people to be able to just hop on a phone call or a video call like this instead of having to go to get a coffee or something that just takes a little more time or might feel like more of a burden to someone.
Yeah, I think that's totally right.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Well, really, really great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And your office is so close to my apartment. I walk by it all the time.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Bye.
Well, yeah, I really appreciated this conversation, everyone. I have a newborn at home, so this is like the most adult discussion I've been engaged in 6 weeks. So thank you for that. Nice to use this part of my brain again.